The Boston Bruins promised to evolve offensively this offseason, but once again, on July 1st, they doubled down on grit.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked Beat. Today is Wednesday, July 2nd. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we are unpacking an offseason that started positively, bold, but has veered back into the caution lane. Don Sweeney spoke at length after July 1st about signings that he made yesterday. And here's how it all shakes out. We're going to talk about this today. Why Victor Arvidsson and Tanner Jeannot were key targets, straight from Don Sweeney's playbook. Another wave of free agent signings that were meant to spark internal competition, but may have boxed out prospects. And the ultimate question, of course, is this team better than the one that finished dead last in the East this past season? Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. That's X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. Got a video blowing up over there in which I said Don Sweeney was cooking. And then, of course, a lot of people came back and pointed to what happened yesterday. Fair enough. Anyways, you can also find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. I'm a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team for various outlets for 20 years now. Now, in that TikTok that I referred to, I said that Don Sweeney has been cooking so far this offseason, especially with the re-signing of Morgan Geekie, with re-signing Michael DiPietro, even bringing Henri Jokiharju back on a modest $3 million contract. He looked pretty good with Nikita Zadorov. And the hope was with $12 million in remaining cap space, they would make somewhat of a splash in free agency by adding a bona fide scorer, top six winger at the very least. Now, in fairness, a lot of the big fish had already been signed or ended up re-signing with their respective clubs. Even Brock Besser ended up going back to Vancouver. So what the Bruins did prior to the start of free agency was target Victor Arvidsson from the Edmonton Oilers, sending a 2027 fifth-round pick to add some bona fide scoring potential. And it's a pretty smart move to bring him in. Sweeney said he was happy to welcome him, his competitiveness, improving the power play. Both Marco Sturm and Steve Spott consulted on this move. It's a plug and play. You can put him in and can pretty much, if he plays a full season, which is a big question mark because of his age and some recent injuries, but he should be able to reach at least 15, 20 goals. He's averaged mid-20s in goal-scoring production for the majority of his career, even over the last few seasons where his gameplay has been diminished. Those per-game averages have remained. He had 7 points in 15 playoff games, 15 goals in 67 regular season games. And it matters because Boston's power play last season was woeful. Slow entries, stagnant play. Arvidsson brings that net front instinct, timing, and finish, directly addressing that issue. It's a one-year commitment, $4 million. It's a low-risk, high-reward ad that could even be flipped at the trade deadline for better than that fifth-round pick that they used to pick him up. So that was a nice move and kind of went with their philosophy of evolving offensively and bringing in some more goal scorers. That was their big weakness last season. they could not score goals, especially in the power play, to save their lives. But the problem is they followed that up by signing Tanner Jeannot to a 5-year deal worth $3.4 million per season, a total of a $17 million investment. Now, it's not a huge percentage of the cap, but that 5-year commitment and being tied to that $3.4 million, when a guy like Jonathan Drouin, who brings a lot more offensive upside, signed in New York for only 2 years and $4 million, that's what they should have done. That's the kind of move they should have been targeting. Now, Sweeney said that the Bruins were an easy out last season. That was part of the problem. We need to get back to being a pain in the ass to play against, he said. So he made the decision to target Arvidsson for that offensive push, but he also said younger, skilled players need breathing room. And Tanner's going to bring a lot of that. He brings physicality and leadership. He drags people in. And if they aren't dragged in, they won't play, is his assessment of some of the other options on the roster. Some of the young guys looking to make a push to full-time NHL jobs. They need to play not like a Tanner Jeannot, but bring that mentality. Like, do or die, getting out there, running through brick walls to help this team win. 7 goals last season. He does have over 1,000 hits over the last 5 seasons. Only 3 NHL forwards have more hits over the last 5 seasons than Tanner Jeannot. He did have a 24-goal rookie year, but hasn't come close to reaching that total. And going back to that athletic assessment yesterday, they called the Jeannot contract a textbook error, similar to Tampa Bay's misstep in 2023 when they traded a handful of picks to the Nashville Predators for Jeannot, and then later quickly jettisoned him to Los Angeles. That contract got a D+, criticizing the long-term bet. And Connor Ryan, Boston.com, added, Jeannot is an on-ice encapsulation of the 2024-25 Bruins. 3rd in the NHL in hits, 28th in goals. This is not where the Bruins needed to invest. And yes, again, it's a modest investment, $3.4 million. It's like between 3 and 4% against the cap. But that's still money that you could have funneled elsewhere. Between Arvidsson and Jeannot, that's $7.4 million. Almost what Brock Besser is getting from the Vancouver Canucks. Certainly enough to have brought in a guy like Jonathan Drouin. It's a heavy gamble, literally, like you're betting on heaviness, toughness, grit, and the move kind of doubles down on what kept the Bruins down last season, which is grit, depth, toughness, but a complete lack of finish. I'm not a fan of this move. With all due respect to Jeannot as a person, even a player, what he brings to the table, it's just not what the Bruins needed. And they saw that when they traded Trent Frederic to the Edmonton Oilers. Some people have compared this trade to Matt Beleskey or David Backes. I'm not quite on that level. I mean, the Beleskey comparison is kind of valid. He signed for 5 years, $3.8 million AAV, signed at age 27 after a career-high 22 goals that he was never able to replicate. Jeannot, 5 years, 3.4. He's a year older, just 13 points last season. The Backes contract, 5 years, $6 million AAV, signed at age 32. That one was a clear miss for the Bruins. All 3 were handed multi-year deals late in their 20s or early 30s, prioritizing intangibles and physical edge, and arrived with red flags in production. He's brought in to bring leadership, protection for young players, drag others into the fight. Same thing was said of Belichick. Brings playoff-style hockey. Backes, character, leadership, hard to play against. All overpaid for grit instead of skill. And it could come at the expense of development and cap flexibility. Jeannot could be seen as today's Belichick and Backes. Maybe not as much Backes because he was making $6 million. Belichick, yeah, that's a fair comparison. And history tells us these moves don't age well, especially when they come at the expense of speed, scoring, and flexibility. Now, the Bruins weren't done there. Arvidsson does serve Boston's needs. You could argue Jeannot suits the Bruins' soul, what they just can't escape from. But the roster building did not stop there. Let's get into the flood of midterm signings and what it means for next year's roster. Do you ever wish managing your money felt a bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. If you've ever looked at your spending and been surprised by how fast it adds up, Monarch Money can start helping you today. Check out monarchmoney.com/LockedOnNHL or code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, so we've discussed Arvidsson, Jeannot. Let's look at the other signings. Again, Sweeney emphasized the need for internal competition. He wanted self-starters who show up and earn their ice time. So Boston went out and signed a handful of veterans and younger guys who could push for playing time this upcoming season. But he may have raised more questions than answers. I know a lot of people are excited about Sean Kuraly being back in black and gold. 2 years, $1.85 million. He called him, like Arvidsson, plug and play, a PK specialist who brings leadership and adds good depth. But where does he play? Who are you bumping out of the lineup to put Sean Kuraly in there? Fraser Minton, John Beecher, Matt Poitras. It's a nice story to have him back, and the Bruins social team was pumping the leap and some highlights, but I'm unmoved by this signing. Michael Eyssimont, 2 years, $1.45 million. Sweeney said he has a lot of juice as a forechecker and a penalty kill piece, but once again, another guy who, in order to play him, you're bumping somebody out who has perhaps more offensive upside. Now, I was pretty pumped with the signings of Matej Blumel, the AHL's top goal scorer with 39 goals. He said, Sweeney did, if you score in the NHL, we want you here. And he had a league-leading 39 goals in the AHL last season. Alex Steeves, another high AHL scorer, who Sweeney called a sleeper. Same message as Blumel. If you score, we want you here. You'll be in the lineup. Jordan Harris on the back end, left shot defenseman, brings flexibility and adaptability under Marco Sturm. Riley Tufte brought back 1 year, 2-way deal, 21 goals in Providence, size and wing depth option. Sweeney framed it as if a young player earns it, he will make the team. There's room and there's competition to be fought out in training camp. The Bruins had $12 million in cap space, but chose checking line depth over scoring upside, aside from bringing in Victor Arvidsson, who's taken up $4 million of that $12 million that was available this time yesterday. And as Connor Ryan of Boston.com wrote, the concern is when that skill set becomes the primary focus. Now, when it comes to Blumel and Steeves, they're proven goal scorers at the AHL level. There's some question as to whether they can replicate that at the the NHL level, which is kind of the same thing as what you're wondering about Georgii Merkulov, Fabian Lysell. This is 1-year contracts that can be placed in the AHL, but the belief is that they can and will challenge for NHL playing time. These are NHL contracts, not two-way contracts or AHL contracts. When you add Jeannot, Kuraly, Eyssimont, that's a third line, a fourth line on some teams. You're therefore taking spots away from guys who are established there on the fourth line or third line, or just at the very least jamming up the bottom six. Guys like Matt Poitras, Fabian Lysell, Fraser Minton, Georgii Merkulov, Johnny Beecher, all now face crowded middle and bottom six spots, making it significantly harder to break through. There is some low risk upside here with Blumel and Steeves, but the glut of veterans may shaft projections that Boston was ready to trust its youth. It's the same old story. How many times have we seen this where there are opportunities open for guys to grab spots, but then they just sign a bunch of, like, go back a few years ago, Nick Foligno, Eric Howla, Thomas Nosek signed, James Van Riemsdyk, Milan Lucic, Kevin Shattenkirk signed. How many times have we seen this play out where they prioritize depth over higher end players or higher end offensive players at the very least? You don't have to go out and get Nikolai Ehlers or Brock Besser or Mitch Marner, but a Jonathan Drouin would have been nice. Andrew Mangiapane, perhaps. Tanner Jeannot may move the needle when it comes to face punching and getting the crowd amped, but it doesn't do much in terms of wins and losses, and most importantly, improving a team whose offense was atrocious last season and who couldn't score on the power play. Is the team better now than it was last season? Well, it's tougher, but Boston needed finish. And we're not talking about fins. We're talking about scoring goals. Did they solve last season's biggest problems in free agency? The answer is a pretty clear no, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Now, Don Sweeney made it woefully clear on Tuesday, and we can all agree that the Bruins came up woefully short last season, ending up dead last in the East. Now, with this year's revamped roster, is Boston any better? I'm not so sure. The group last season lacked consistent secondary scoring outside of David Pastrnak, Morgan Geekie chipping in. The power play fizzled, and physically they may have hit hard, but they couldn't close out tight games. Inconsistent, and were often quite, as Sweeney said, an easy out, losing some lopsided games. They added Victor Arvidsson, who brings proven offensive skill and power play acumen, Blumel and Steeves offer potential scoring depth that last year's opening night roster completely lacked. They added some grit and some bite, some skill, or I guess leadership, tenacity in Jeannot, Eyssimont, Kuraly. Maybe that physicality was missing last year, supporting Sweeney's goal to be tougher. But again, you've possibly sidelined some developing youth in Poitras, Lysell, Minton, Merkulov, who are now battling for ice time before a more veteran-laden bottom six. Some fringe younger players saw lineup minutes last season. It's going to be difficult again. The defensive depth was bolstered by bringing Georgii Merkulov back, signing Jordan Harris, adding Victor Soderstrom, and you have more stability in net this season, but also some perhaps uncomfortable competition. Swayman will continue to be the anchor. Korpisalo remains in the mix. A lot of us thought that perhaps the Arvidsson trade would have resulted in Korpisalo moving out because we all know the Oilers need some goaltending help. You've signed Michael DiPietro, who is seemingly going to battle it out with Korpisalo for the backup job in training camp, and whoever loses could very well be sent back to Providence. So here's the thing. You did add some secondary scoring in Victor Arvidsson, but it's not a long-term solution because he's already 32. He's only under contract for one more season. Perhaps if Blumel or Steeves crack the lineup, Boston gains an extra goal threat and power play depth. But again, that could come at the expense of one of your homegrown guys like a Poitras or a Lysell. At the end of the day, as Sweeney said, if you can score goals, you will be in the lineup. And perhaps that's a knock on Merkulov, who didn't score in his 6 games last season. Fabian Lysell was only able to get on the board like once down the stretch. Jeannot, Eyssimont, Kuraly offer a physical presence that could enforce the pain-in-the-ass identity Sweeney demands, something that last year's group lacked. That's kind of an indictment on last year's leadership group as well, and the coaching staff. They didn't get guys up for those games, and they were pushed around. And again, you saw so many lopsided losses last season. Harris adds depth and puck-moving ability, complementing the core of McAvoy, Lindholm, Lorei, Zadorov. Now you have Peak, Georgii Merkulov on the right side. It's a pretty solid blue line that could help the team remain competitive, and that's going to be key because, again, if the Bruins have any chance of bouncing back next season, it's going to come from Jeremy Swayman getting back to the guy that we all believe he can be. Beyond Arvidsson, though, the Bruins still lack an elite scoring winger or center to properly complement Pastrnak and Geekie. The scoring ceiling kind of remains moderate. And Don Sweeney even said, you can't bank on Morgan Geekie necessarily replicating his success from last season because he did have an inflated shooting percentage. And it's kind of a fool's errand to expect that he will repeat that. Having said that, he believes he can still be like at least a 25 goal scorer and should still push for top line minutes with David Pastrnak, Elias Lindholm up there with them to round things out. What it means for the youth, again, who knows? But Don Sweeney, thankful to get that Morgan Geekie deal done. He reiterated the Bruins' offseason strategy is going to involve both trades and free agency with the aim of improving the team's competitiveness and bringing juice back to the roster. And his goal, he said, was to balance internal improvement with external additions, boosting both skill and energy. Arvidsson should bring competitiveness and power play ability. Jeannot brings physicality and energy. an edge to drag people into the fight. Jeannot and Eyssimont may be used on the penalty kill. And he just wants them to be harder to play against. But at the end of the day, you still need to score. Sweeney stated plainly, if a young player earns a spot, he's making the team. So what these guys have to do is embrace that competition and push one of these older guys out. The power play was disconnected, predictable, failing at zone entries. Arvidsson will help there. Geekie's deal reflects a belief in sustained production. They've got some defensive depth now, leadership support, Jeannot and Kuraly. The new room will focus on energy, professionalism, and internal accountability. Marco Sturm is going to instill direct, structured system, and players who play the right way will get ice time. You got to be aggressive, structured, and also execute is the goal from there. And Blumel, Steeves are internal candidates who could surprise and compete for roster spots given their AHL scoring success last season. Blumel especially cited, David Pastrnak, fellow Czech, as the reason why he signed. Sweeney believes team needs offensive growth from within, especially on the power play, emphasizing Steve Spott's role there. They still have a bit of cap flexibility and draft capital to make in-season trades if the offense doesn't materialize. The UFA market was narrow. Other teams locked up their top UFAs before July 1st. Florida, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, Aaron Ekblad, Mitch Marner, sign and trade with Vegas, Brock Besser going back. And so, having said that, he believes that the additions that he's made will help push some of the young guys who have an ability to step up and grab roster spots. And he also believes that the Bruins are tougher, deeper, more structured than last year's low-energy squad. They're harder to play against, more battle-ready, and with the addition of Arvidsson and some guys coming up or pushing others out, that scoring should come. But the main problem remains unresolved. They lack elite scoring depth and star talent. Yeah, they added James Higgins, probably a year away at the very least, or maybe he comes later in the season. But they still only have David Pastrnak as like a legit top-level scoring talent on this team. They don't have a true number one center. They don't have anybody beyond Pastrnak, really, that you can bank on. All respect to Geekie, who had that 33-goal season, but it's kind of a let's see it happen again situation before we know exactly who he is. The team might poke harder now. They might be more of a pain in the ass to play against, but can they defend better? Can they stop more pucks? And can they score enough goals to win close games or avoid being blown out 8-1 by the Carolina Hurricanes or being thrashed on opening night by the Florida Panthers? They came out last opening night looking to make a statement against the Panthers, who kind of just laughed it off and dropped 6 goals on them. Yes, with Joonas Korpisalo making the start. The Bruins got grittier, but unless their young guns break loose or the scoring depth truly evolves by Blumel, Steeves taking next steps, or Lysell and Merkulov pushing those guys aside to claim their spots as Boston Bruins, they could be a bit better, harder to play against, but maybe not good enough to get back in the playoff mix sooner than later. Gavin McKenna waiting to be drafted next season. It's not quite the inspiring retool that we all hoped for. It kind of reminded me of the transition season that they believed they were in a couple years ago when they brought in Van Riemsdyk, Lucic, Shattenkirk, and were able to get career years out of Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, ride that goaltending tandem that they had at the time to great success and advance to the second round of the playoffs. Can this team do that? If they get career years out of a guy like Casey Middlestat, if Arvidsson is healthy and scores 25 goals, 30 goals, if the defense can stay healthy and shut guys down. Again, you have to look at last season and remember who was hurt, who was not in the lineup. If Pavel Zacha can regain his form, a lot of things have to hit right for the Bruins to be competitive again next season. And as good as Don Sweeney has been so far this offseason, yesterday felt like a bit of a step backwards, going back to the future in a wrong way. Like we went to the Biff Tannen timeline here with the Tanner Jeannot signing instead of riding the positive Marty McFly timeline with the New Jerseys. Anyways, that's it for today's follow-up assessment of July 1st free agent moves. We will touch on development camp later on this week, what we learned about some of those prospects. We'll touch on any other breaking news with respect to the Boston Bruins. Be sure to be locked on to YouTube, TikTok, Reels for the breaking news with respect to this team, and check the podcast feeds and YouTube for full breakdowns of what our Boston Bruins do. A lot of signings going on. Parker Witherspoon, Justin Brazeau joining the Penguins. I don't know. The Bruins were just limited by kind of the free agent market, but also didn't spend like they should have gone for Jonathan Drouin over Tanner Jeannot. That's just a no-brainer. Maybe they're looking towards next summer when there could be some more free agents available. But again, that's kind of a fool's errand, seeing as how many guys were re-signed early this offseason. A bit of a cautionary tale there. Anyways, no offseason here on Locked On. We're staking daily for the next little bit, although I will be off for a couple days next season. And, next week, I should say. You're going to want to check out Locked On NHL next for all the news from around the league. And I really do hope you'll stay with me here through the offseason. Please do take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.